Welcome. I'm Glen Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. This month's program focuses on East Timor, a newly independent nation in the South Pacific. We have 3 guests from Seattle who've been working to understand East Timor, developing people-to-people relationships with students in East Timor, and also helping people in the U.S. support the Timorese people's passion for justice, peace, freedom, and a better future. I'm happy to welcome Ashley Barnard and Hashi Hashimoto and Jack Szwaja. Good to have you all here.
Good to be here.
I wonder if you could each just say something brief about yourself and your connection to East Timor. Ashley.
Well, I am a recent graduate from Nova High School in Seattle, and I was the founder of the East Timor Sister School Project.
Great, thanks. Hashi?
And well, I've been at Nova since the beginning of this most recent school year, and I've been involved with the Sister School Project as long as that.
Okay. Joe?
I got a little bit involved with East Timor while I was on the Madison City Council, supporting it in small ways, but have been working regularly on the issue of East Timor since I moved to Seattle in 1993, Glenn.
Great. Good to have you all here. Most people probably watching the program have no idea about the background of East Timor other than a little period of time in 1999 when the news covered the election. Could you tell us something, Ashley, about the history during the colonial era?
Okay. Well, in the 1700s, the Dutch colonized most of the island group that's now Indonesia. But half of the island of Timor, which is right above Australia, was colonized by the Portuguese. Most of the people who lived in those islands over time developed an identity of being Indonesians, and especially during the fight for independence. Timor, which went on for a long time after the independence of Indonesia, being a Portuguese colony, never really developed an identity with the other groups there. In 1975, when the Carnation Revolution happened in Portugal, Timor finally got a chance to be an independent country. The Portuguese pulled out, and Indonesia swooped in almost immediately and took over. They occupied for roughly 3 decades, and during that time, about 1/3 of the population of the Timorese were killed.
Can you tell us, thanks, Joe, can you tell us something about the Santa Cruz massacre of 1991? That was
For sure, Glenn. That was a turning point, as many of the viewers know, in East Timor's history. As Ashley said, they had been invaded in 1975 by Indonesia. And during most of the time between 75 and 91, the international press, the U.S. press in particular, said very little about East Timor, even though the population was being wiped out, women were being sterilized, and there was an attempted destruction of their culture. In 1991, the East Timorese believed that the Portuguese were going to send a delegation, fact-finding delegation, to discover what was really going on. They organized in response to what they thought would be this international delegation. The delegation never came because the Portuguese were never assured they'd have free access to really see what was going on. However, there were many journalists there in anticipation of this delegation. So Timorese student had been killed. People marched to the cemetery to place wreaths on the grave. There were media there, and the Timorese believed that since the media was there, that the Indonesian military wouldn't fire on them as they had so often before. However, they did. They fired without warning and killed over 270 people, peaceful demonstrators. Fortunately, a videotape was recovered from the cemetery that made it onto the CBS News. It began to be a bit of an issue in the U.S. media. Also, 2 journalists from the U.S. were beaten severely and almost killed. So that began the international awareness, particularly in the U.S., of the situation of East Timor, helped launch the powerful solidarity movement here in the U.S. with East Timor.
Yeah, and it's been going ever since. I mean,
That's right.
I know you've been active since '93, and,
Right.
and a group that you work with a lot that we'll talk about later really got rolling then.
Exactly, yeah.
Let's see, you were involved also in '99 when the election was being held with trying to get some media coverage. Tell us what happened.
Well, the international media did give East Timor its 15 seconds or minutes of fame at that time. There was, Indonesia was falling apart economically. They had lost the ability to pay back their loans, and so international solidarity movement was really making itself felt. And there was, because of the demands of people around the world, the Indonesians reluctantly had to hold what they called a consultation, an election, to see what the real wishes were of the East Timorese about independence. So at that time, our group raised money to send observers to try to make the elections as safe as they could. There was a lot of violence there, but we feel because we and others sent election observers, it helped to reduce the violence a little bit. So we sent a couple folks from Seattle to go and observe the process whereby the East Timorese finally voted for independence.
And when we were on the phone to prepare for the program, you mentioned that the United Nations had done something right there, although belatedly.
Yes, they took a long time to do anything about East Timor. They were unfortunately blocked by our own government, Glenn, who really stopped them from taking any effective action. However, in '98-'99, the UN did broker an agreement between Australia, Indonesia, and Portugal, the former colonizer, which we felt far too late, but nevertheless did call for this international election whereby, facing death threats, over 98% of the people of East Timor voted.
I read about, in preparing for the show, I was doing the reading on that, and they had like 98.6% is the figure I saw in one article. I mean, to have virtually everybody vote when they were getting death threats.
Exactly.
And you look at the dismal turnout you got here.
16% in Seattle that year,
Yeah.
but it was an amazing expression of civic involvement.
Well, the people there have something to vote for
They
one
sure
thing,
did.
but, that's a different matter and probably a topic for a different show. So East Timor is free now. They're an independent nation. And what's been happening since the election?
Well, there's a lot of efforts. I mean, Hashi one of our students, she can talk about what she saw in Timor. I mean, I think the Timorese have a great spirit of rebuilding, and our project is one where we're trying to help the sister school and the clinic, and I just feel they have a great a lot of work to do, but a wonderful spirit of trying to rebuild. Do you want to talk more about what you saw?
Yeah, I mean, despite all the devastation, it is rebuilding itself, but it's still the poorest country in Asia. There are a few organizations there. There's the Alola Foundation, which actually first found out about the sister school.
Which is mostly a women's organizing group.
And it was started by the First Lady of the country, and then there are schools that are being rebuilt, and, you know, there are about 20 schools in the country now. Government buildings are being rebuilt. Well, there's also different businesses opening up, and there are people, both people following traditional way of life and people becoming more industrialized and going more towards opening up shops and whatnot. It is quite a combination, but it's a lot less industrialized than here.
During this past school year, you were both students at NOVA, which is an alternative school in Seattle that's part of the Seattle public school system.
Yeah.
So it's a public school, but it's an alternative. And you were organizing this sister school relationship. We'll talk about that in a moment. But you've got a relationship with a school there that's Escola Kerala.
Escola Kerala Secundaria.
And so it's a secondary school.
Yeah.
Meaning high school.
Okay.
Escola, school. Secundaria, secondary.
Okay. And let's see, a few days ago when we talked on the phone, you said that when you first made the contact, it was paired up with a middle school, and now it's separate. But you started 3 years ago. You were a ninth grader 3 years ago and started this thing. I go, whoa! Tell us about that. How did you start this? How did you happen to?
Well, I got connected with the East Timor Action Network, ETAN, the local Seattle group of that, through Jack Szwaja, to get credit in a class. He uses classes to get kids to get involved pretty often. And I started working with that group, and I thought all the people that were there were really great people. And it just kind of dawned on me that NOVA was the perfect school to make some kind of connection over there. So I had to contact a lot of different people to finally find a school. Communication is always difficult in Timor for a lot of different reasons. But after emailing someone who connected me to someone else, who connected me to someone else, I finally got in touch with Kirsty Sor Guzmao, who's actually the First Lady of Timor. I didn't know that when I was first emailing her. I didn't realize that till later. And she connected me to a school that had just been organized, which was Kerala.
So, how would you organize the sister school project from Seattle? So you got a contact there, and what do you do within NOVA to hustle this thing?
Well, definitely one way to get kids involved is tell them that they'll get their service learning credit. But a lot of kids, maybe they just came because they needed some hours or some credit. But most of the kids that got involved really, loved the project. And, we got to write letters to these students, and we got back letters and pictures and artwork.
So it had a personal feel. It wasn't just an abstract academic thing. It had a, now, in the spring of 2005, so 3 of you plus some other students. Was it 10 students total?
10 students and 2 adults.
Plus you and your wife, Deborah.
Right.
All went and visited the school that you had the connection with.
Finally, we got to actually meet
pretty
them.
Cool. And so tell us just briefly about what you did there, what the thing was about. Anybody?
Well, so we were in East Timor for a total of 10 days, and we were in Dili for part of the time. We gave...
Dili's the capital?
Yes,
Yeah.
Dili is the capital, sorry.
Okay.
We gave $1,000 to a local health clinic, Hiam Health, and that helps out largely poor people and people with malnutrition. And then we went to Manatuto, and where the school is located, and we stayed there for about a week. And we we lived in a house owned by some of the local people and got to know the family there.
A boarding house.
Yes, a boarding house. And we got to experience walking to school every day with people, and we taught English to some of the kids, and we befriended people there. And we also visited the Alola Foundation. And yeah, got to experience walking a mile to school each day.
More than a mile.
An hour. Sorry.
More than a mile.
Wrong word. An hour to school each
hour.
day, and back in the afternoon
Yeah.
heat with virtually no shade.
Yeah.
In 100 degrees.
I learned to be rather lucky, I'm rather lucky to have an hour bus ride to school.
Yeah, instead of walking it.
Yeah.
One of you had mentioned that when you got there, this town that you were at is not a big tourist place. And outsiders
Not
just
at
don't
all.
go there.
Not much.
Oh,
To the Timorese, it's a city, but to us, it's a tiny little town.
One of you mentioned how unusual it was to have people there who were not Timorese there. All of a sudden, some.
we stick out like sore thumbs.
Uh-huh.
Especially 12 of us. I mean, that was unheard of since the UN had come. Like 12 people from the U.S. and we were just famous, and the little kids just loved us. They'd come to our porch every night, and we'd entertain them. And
Also,
people
I
are
mean,
great.
like she mentioned the UN, most of the people who would go to Manatutu were aid workers, Peace Corps workers, maybe journalists. 10 high school students who weren't any kind of professionals in anything. That was something to see.
So you actually were able to teach some English. Now, one of you told me on the phone that some of the students there knew some English.
Yeah, I was actually, they have very, very few resources for learning English or practically any of their subjects, but I was surprised by how much English they knew, and it was because they wanted to learn English so much, both because it's fun to talk to American kids, I guess, and also because, it's going to give them a lot more opportunities.
And so you went to some classes and did some teaching there?
Yeah, it was supposed to be an English lesson, but it really ended up being more of an exchange, since they spoke better English than we spoke their language, Tetum. So, it was an exchange of language as well as culture.
Well, one of you told me on the phone that Tetum, their language, was only recently produced in written form. So you said it was very phonetic.
Oh yeah, that's very nice.
So yeah. And that you taught each other some songs.
Oh yeah, some of us taught them English songs, and then we would sing songs together, and they sang songs for us. Actually, the family that we stayed with taught us a few simple Tetun songs.
So the conditions in the school were pretty minimal?
Well, the school is actually, the buildings are nice. Kairala is the name, the traditional name of the president of East Timor, Sanana Guzmao. That's his Timorese name. So the government gave them those buildings, so they're actually nice new buildings, but they have very little
Nothing in them.
accoutrements or amenities. They don't really have electricity. They didn't even have desks, although our project, Glen, to fund them has provided them with some desks now, so that's something that was their _1 priority. We've been able to help them with that, plus some money to help them for teachers. So they do have some decent buildings now, but they have very little infrastructure.
Yeah, and they used to not have chairs, so the students would have to sit on the floor and ride on the floor. Now, our funds have helped give them chairs, but it adds up, the price adds up for buying the chairs and buying the desks, and also and basic supplies. The erasers, there are only a few going around, and there are 8 classrooms, so constantly while we were teaching, we'd have to go to the other classrooms or send one of the students to the other classroom to get the erasers.
Erasers for the blackboard.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the chalk also, and just very basic things that you take for granted.
Yeah. So how much financial support have you folks been able to provide? You've done
lot.
it in segments.
We've sent them now over $10,000, and they've been very grateful, Glenn. When we got there, many of the local leaders knew about the project, not just the school teachers, but
The whole town knew.
the whole town knew, and just really thanked us from the bottom of their hearts. And we feel good to be able to provide a small amount of what we kind of consider to be reparations, because our government as many of your viewers know, provided 90% of the funds for the military weapons that nearly destroyed the people and the infrastructure of Timor. So in a very small way, we're trying to give back what we can to make up what our government tore us under.
And we'll talk some more about that later, because it's a story that needs to be told.
For sure.
And so we'll explore that in some depth a bit later in the program.
Yeah.
Hashi, a couple of days ago you told me that you encourage people to see things outside of our own culture.
Yeah.
And I think that probably fits in well with what we're saying here too. So tell us some more about that.
Well, being in this country was just a great experience for me. And also it really opens up my eyes to just how people live in different countries, and also little things that you take for granted, you know, and
Plumbing.
oh, plumbing, yes. A tiny bathroom for 12 people without actual flushing, and other things. And also our healthcare, running water, not having all these diseases going around, temperature, mild weather, money, having these, well, not everybody lives in fancy houses, but I come from a middle-class family, and so did, well, pretty much everybody that went on the trip. And just very basic things. And also the people there seem so much happier despite that they have less materially. People here tend to be so discontented, and it's all, I think that people don't really tend to see how lucky they are. And it's just a wonderful experience, though, also, to just go to a place like that where it's so much less stressful. And it just seems like you're getting down to what's real in life instead of bills and, you know, stress and office.
Yeah. You brought a videotape that has some footage of the welcome that you received.
Yeah.
And we'll show that in just a moment here. Tell us what we'll see in this segment. It's a little over a minute and a half of video.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. We're arriving from Dili, the capital, to Manatutu. Of course, we've never been there before, and we love Timor, but we're very hot and very exhausted. And we get there, and you know, we finally get to our sister school, which we've never seen. We've exchanged letters with these folks, but we get there, and then you'll see the Timorese. They presented us with their traditional hats and ties, which are the weavings that they draped around us, and they then performed. The students did their traditional dances and music, and it's just the welcoming ceremony that they gave us when we first arrived. So that's what the viewers will see.
Okay, well, let's watch this now. It'll be just a little over a minute and a half worth of video.
Yeah.
We'll see that welcome. Well, they had just a very warm welcome, and you told me before the program about how generous the people are.
Definitely.
And you'd mentioned that even, you know, even with all the malnutrition, they fed everybody well. And
Yeah, we had at least 3, you know, like banquet-sized meals a day. Sometimes we even had a 4th meal, because if we ever went to anyone's house, you know, it was very important that they feed us. It was kind of like an honor that they get to, feed these guests. Hospitality is definitely a very important thing in Timorese culture, and especially since we were from a foreign country, it was especially important.
You have one of their weavings there. Can you show this?
Yeah, I think that this is a guy, so these are called tais, T-A-I-S, and I believe that this is one that a guy would wear around his waist. And yeah, very beautiful weavings done on simple looms. I mean, it's just amazing the type of weavings that they do. Usually the full-size weavings would go from here down to here.
Wow.
The women's would go that far, yeah.
Yeah, the women's would. And as you saw in the video, there are some people wearing traditional weavings.
Yeah, the young people would only wear that for special occasion, but some of the older ladies still wore it.
That's the traditional thing. Want to find out a bit more about the conditions there, which you've described, in terms of poverty and the health problems and stuff. Tell us about the health conditions, or in particular.
Well, these recovering people don't exactly have all that many resources or
You mean like recovering from the Indonesian occupation?
or time, to focus on certain health concerns that seem most basic here. They do boil their water. It isn't safe to drink. But they don't really have facilities for washing their hands. Disease spreads around there pretty rampantly. Some of the biggest concerns are mosquito-spread diseases. There's malaria. We got immunized for various diseases, but malaria was a big concern over there. And one of the biggest, there's a big epidemic of dengue fever, which is a very harsh disease.
But there is no vaccine for yet.
And there is no vaccine.
And that's also a mosquito
Yes,
carried thing?
carried by mosquitoes. And so what happens is that somebody gets it the first time, they're sick for a week, and it feels like all the bones are breaking in their body. Unfortunately, much of the time, people mistake this for just being a really bad fever. Second time, I think 70% of people who get it the second time die. Usually people die the second or third time.
Indeed, while we were there, Gwen, 2 people died of dengue. One of the students from our sister school, whom we had met our first day, contacted dengue and died while we were there, and so did the very beloved priest from the town of Manatutu, who had defended them, the Timorese, against the Indonesian occupation. So we were invited to both of those funerals and welcomed in to be part of the ceremony. It was very powerful, very sad to see, how death is an everyday experience for folks over there.
But how human to be included in.
They included us in a wonderful way.
Wow.
They did.
Yeah. And there's a health clinic. Was that there, or is that a different place?
It's actually in Dili, the Hayam Health, which we have also funded through our coffee sales and other fundraisers. Glenn, we assist the sister school. Also this clinic that helps with preventative care, helping with malnutrition. Also, I think what we would call here hospice care, which is the poorest of the poor who are in the last few months of life and don't have money to make that experience more comfortable, and also for their funerals. So our funding helps those poorest of the poor in the capital, Dili, as well.
And Hashi, you mentioned on the phone in preparing for the show some similarities between the teenagers there and here. It's one thing for adults to go travel and do this thing, but for younger folks to connect is a special thing. Tell us.
Well, there are similarities and differences, They're still teenagers, and we can relate to them as such. They'll listen to some of the same music, but, music gets over there slower. They like to play sports. They like to play music. People over there, some people played guitar and sing songs for us. Also, they do have problems, like with their boyfriends or girlfriends, and, what are some of the other similarities, that...
Weird, stupid inside jokes that adults don't understand. I'd say that overall they were probably nicer than American teenagers, but they were definitely, they totally had like the same kind of humor that we did. even though they came from this totally different place. And it was just really obvious that they were, you know, they weren't savages, or they weren't like innocent forest people or whatever weird stereotypes there are about people in undeveloped countries. They were just people.
Is that sort of a breakthrough that you go, whoa, how about that? You
Well,
know?
I mean, you get to know these people, and it's all, hey, you know, there are these similarities and differences. There are these wonderful qualities, and then again, there are problems. And also, the gossip there is rampant. I mean, both among the teenagers and the adults. I don't know how much we were talked about, but you don't really know until you learn the language, I guess. Yeah, but also, in terms of differences, the teenagers over there, I mean, it's crazy to imagine. I don't even know what sort of things these people went through, these people who are our age. I mean, the tragedy that they must have gone through, and also little kids who are about 7 years old can have gone through just horrible, horrible things. That's something that I didn't get to find out much about while I was there, but it's really amazing what these people have survived through.
I just wanted to share, Glenn, that, you know, in my many years of teaching, this has been the most rewarding thing I've done, I think, and the most meaningful for the students. And one thing we're trying to do is to get other high schools to connect with high schools in East Timor, because we're helping out Manatutu, but there's many schools that need
All over the
help,
country.
and I think it also enriches our own students. So if there's any viewers that know of a high school or a church or some organization like that that would like to connect with one in East Timor, I highly recommend it.
Because there are some high school students and teachers who have some good sense of international stuff. There are a couple of schools that have Amnesty International chapters, for example, and there's
We could help connect them up
some
potentially
awareness.
with East Timorese schools.
Yeah, that would be fun.
But also, there are only 20 schools, high school, elementary, whatever, in all of East Timor right now. So it could help create more, which would definitely be good. But if you can't find a school to hook up with, then there are also other things that you can do. There's plenty of help that this country needs, especially in becoming more, you know, independent.
Yeah. I wonder if we can talk some more about developing, let's see. Oh, we've covered this already. This was good. We want to get a bit more in detail about the history of what happened during the Indonesian occupation stuff. That's where we need to go next. Indonesia invaded in 1975, and for about a quarter of a century then, Indonesia was occupying East Timor up until around and the time of the 1999 election.
Yes.
Could somebody share some information about what was going on? Did we cover the background? I don't think we did, about what happened in 1975 when the invasion began. And
Do you want to take that, Joe?
Sure, I don't believe we covered it, Glenn. The reason why, let me just clear up a couple of misconceptions. Some people who know about it assume that it must be a religious conflict or a civil war, and it was neither. East Timor, as I actually said, was a Portuguese colony. It had no historical nor cultural ties to Indonesia. When Portugal was preoccupied with its own internal struggles in the mid-70s, Indonesia took advantage of that to invade, partly because East Timor has oil. Now, they were allied with the U.S., and they requested permission.
this is the Indonesian government.
That's right, the Indonesian government led by the dictator Suharto.
That's right. I mean, he's a dictator. This was not
General
a democracy.
Suharto, he was a very,
vicious dictator.
very violent dictator who killed many of his own people. He requested in '75 from our Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, and our President, General Gerald Ford, who were in Indonesia. They actually told them of their plans, and we know now from cables that have been released that the U.S. gave the green light and said, it's okay, you can go ahead and invade them. So they did.
Because my recollection is that Ford and Kissinger were visiting there.
Indeed, they were there.
And they left, and as soon as they left, the invasion went
As soon as
ahead.
they left, they invaded, and
So
it was...
You knew it was clearly a green light.
It was a green light, and that's been proven. And they invaded. The Timorese resisted very heroically, very valiantly. They had a history of resisting
Against the Portuguese
against
as
the
well.
Portuguese and the Japanese, and they fought very valiantly. But the Indonesians had much more firepower, a much bigger country. As soon as they invaded, the U.S. doubled military assistance to Indonesia to allow them to attempt to swallow up East Timor. So, you know, most of the killing happened between '75 and the early '80s. There were massive relocation of people into concentration camps, whole-scale killing of sterilization campaigns against women, the attempted wiping out of their culture and languages.
And this is with,
Systematic rape.
Indeed.
and this is with U.S. tax
With
dollars.
U.S.
Oh, yeah.
tax dollars and,
and
full
our
knowledge.
military doing that. or
Full knowledge, and it was
military supplies.
exactly. And it's important to remember, Glenn, that this wasn't the sins of the Republicans or the Democrats. This was both parties, you know, all the way from Gerald Ford up to President Clinton, supported this policy of supporting the illegal and abominable treatment of the Timorese by the Indonesians. So,
Even good old Jimmy Carter.
exactly. I mean, the reasons are manifold, but we have substantial economic ties with Indonesia. They were our Cold War ally, and so the U.S. just decided, for the most part, to look the other way. However, beginning in 1991, after the Santa Cruz massacre that we talked about, people in the U.S. began to learn about it, and through their efforts and the courage of the Timorese, as well as an amazing solidarity movement around the world, pressure was brought to bear, and little by little during the 90s, U.S. aid began to be cut off.
Yeah. Well, I remember Congress would start to put up some conditions or say, no, not this, or you can't.
Indeed,
do
they
that.
did. Following the Santa Cruz
So
massacre,
bit by bit, but there were some people in Congress that really stood up and did the right thing.
Indeed, there were on both sides of the aisle, Glenn,
Yeah.
and there were many Democrats, such as Senator Feingold from Wisconsin. But I also want to recognize, you know, Chris Smith and Congresswoman Dana Rothberger from California, Republicans, who also opposed our support of Indonesia. So little by little, beginning in '92, aid was cut off in portions until finally, in '99, right around the time of the referendum, we finally pulled out aid. Regrettably, our aid has been now renewed to Indonesia. So that's one of the things we want to ask people to do, because Indonesia still threatens East Timor. We want to ask the viewers to contact their congresspersons and ask them to not support Indonesia, this country that has government who's been so brutal to their neighbors.
And it's not just East Timor. There's several
Exactly.
parts of Indonesia that
Aceh
Aceh and West Papua that
Yeah.
feel they're being treated unfairly by the central government.
In researching to prepare for the program, I found some articles, including stuff that you had written, and in an article you wrote in 1996, you said, relative to the population, the killings in East Timor rank among the worst genocides of the 20th century, and this was accomplished with weapons supplied almost totally by the United States. So given the fact that that was a small population, the numbers, the absolute numbers are really huge. You know, it's like, what, a third of the population?
That's right,
That's
over
what you said?
200,000 people.
Yeah, it's amazing, and that's our tax dollars.
Certainly one of the
That's our-
crimes of the 20th century. It's also, I mean, it's one of the crimes, and at the same time, it's one of the great people's victories. It's really one of the great David and Goliath struggles of all time, because of the courage of the Timorese and solidarity from people all the way from Australia to Portugal to Ireland, the U.S. The Timorese are now free, and so it shows that if people get involved and bring their opinions to bear, you really can make a difference. And our project, Glenn, as Ashley has so eloquently described, it's really not charity. We like charity, but this is really reparations, giving back, you know, something to repair something that our government helped destroy.
When we were talking about the program to prepare for it, a couple of you had mentioned some of the misconceptions that we need to clear up, and one was, as you just said, this was not a civil war.
No, not at all.
It
It was an invasion.
It was an invasion.
Illegal occupation.
And yeah.
There was a small civil war right after the Portuguese pulled out, and
Between the Timorese, different
within,
factions, right?
yeah, within the thing.
But that was totally over by the time the Indonesians
right.
invaded.
Right.
the
And so-
Indonesians tried to use that as
Right.
an excuse. They blocked out all media, and they just tried to tell people that, oh, we're trying to keep peace between these different
Yeah.
tribes here.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a lie.
And also Indonesia is largely Muslim and East Timor is largely Catholic, but this is not a religious war, so we need to debunk that, because the popular notion nowadays is to paint everything as a religious war, and that's not the case here.
Indonesia is largely Muslim. It's one of the largest Muslim countries in the
Yeah.
world.
It's actually, in population, it's the largest one.
Yeah. But they do also have a lot of other religions there.
Yeah.
And religious tolerance is one of the very few things that I think they do well. Several of the top generals during the East Timor conflict were actually Christians. So it was really about resources.
And also, one of you had said that it was, since East Timor isn't very populous, and there are a lot of Indonesians. Indonesia is like the 4th largest population in the world. It was sort of like a space that, can we clear out these local people and let some of our folks move in? One of you had mentioned something along that
Very
line.
much. It's very similar to, I think, Glenn, what we did in our own history was when there were social conflicts in the eastern part of the country, we would often try to diffuse that by having people move west, and I think that's happened with the Indonesians. They call it transmigration. They're doing the same thing now in West Papua, so that was another motivation.
Yeah, well, China's been trying to destroy Tibetan culture
Exactly.
and actively move Chinese people in there to supplant them.
Similar
It's
case.
definitely not just something Indonesia's done or just something the U.S.
Yeah.
has done. It's
Yeah.
large powers all over the world
Yeah.
have had these same patterns of brutality.
And then also, this was not an area that was struck by the tsunami. That was Indonesia, but it's not East Timor. East Timor has these problems you're describing they have to deal with, at least not the tsunami.
It's a man-made disaster, unfortunately funded and approved by our government, so that's why we want to give back and
So, yeah,
make it better.
Which ought to be more compelling than even than a natural disaster,
Yeah.
because a natural disaster you can't help it. You know,
This is preventable,
This is preventable. It should have
repairable.
been prevented.
Definitely. I mean, I gave some money to the people trying to, repair after the tsunami, but like you said, that's something we can only really try to help once it's happened. Something man-made, we can try to stop it from happening with our government's policies.
Yeah. One of the things that was really cool was that a couple of the top Timorese people got the Nobel Peace Prize. Can you tell us about that?
That was Bishop Bello and Jose Ramos Horta. What year was that in, Joe?
1996,
96.
October of 96.
Yeah. The Catholic Church, actually, high up in the church, really, does not like it when people try to rebel against their government in any way. But a lot of the local churches, a lot of the priests in East Timor were standing up for the people and saying we need to make a good place here on earth, even before we go on. And so he was kind of rebelling against, what the church wanted him to do to help his people. And Jose Ramos Horta was the delegate to the UN from East Timor.
Right, longtime diplomat who was their spokesman internationally. It really helped East Timor, Glenn, because it gave them that gave their struggle international credibility.
Exactly.
Many people who have never heard of it, and if you talk about East Timor, as we tried, so many people hadn't heard about it. It wasn't in the New York Times, and so they're kind of like, I don't know if this is really happening. I haven't heard about it. After this happened, it really made the international news, and it gave their struggle a lot of credibility that hadn't had before.
So that's one more thing about the ambition of the people to really assert their freedom and their inherent human dignity, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important to pay attention to media sources besides the mainstream, because that is very heavily monitored and whatnot, and East Timor is just very, hardly any coverage, and you just compare coverage on events that happen in Europe and coverage on events that happen in East Timor. For example, the bombing in England, which still is of course, that's still a tragedy and whatnot, but we really need to get our priorities straight in terms of, we need to also focus on other things and, indie media or whatnot.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more. We've talked some about the U.S. foreign policy, but we need to be clear about this because when we were preparing for the show, all three of you had expressed concerns about the U.S. role in this, and we've talked about that a fair amount. You had mentioned, the efforts in Congress in the 90s to whittle back on this, and what we've been seeing, let's see. There's a note here that says, although Clinton had attended East Timor's independence celebration, Clinton had continued to support Indonesia's military.
He had, and indeed, under just one quick point about that, Glenn, Congress was restricting aid under the so-called IMET training. At the same time they were doing that, and saying that because of human rights concerns, we should not give training to this murderous military. The Clinton administration was allowing them to purchase training through a loophole. So they were violating the will of Congress during that time.
I know I've read a number of things over the years, and then in preparing for this, I read a bunch of things just recently, and it's like amazing how much of that hypocrisy, double standard. There's this one that I typed in here that it's just flabbergasted. When the Bush regime is trying to restore the aid, and some of it, Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State, was able to restore unilaterally, even though she did this, I think it was 2 days, within 2 days of the date when the State Department's report came out saying, talk about the Indonesian military, saying security force members murdered, tortured, raped, beat, and arbitrarily detained civilians and members of separatist movements, especially in Aceh and to a lesser extent in Papua. So here the military, the Secretary of State, the State Department's own report about Indonesia tells how brutal they are in murdering, torturing, raping, beating, and so forth. And within 2 days of that, Condoleezza Rice is saying, sure, I'll authorize more military aid for these. And then Bush and the House of Representatives, Republicans, are pushing through, I guess did push through, right? Lifting all the restrictions on U.S. military aid for Indonesia in the 2006 fiscal year Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. And in looking, and my recollection of what's happened with military aid to Indonesia over the years, and in things I read again just lately to prepare for the show, it's like when we cut off aid, or even threaten to cut off aid, that gets their attention.
It really
and
does.
Otherwise, they figure they got a free ride, they can do what they want, because they got both parties, whether it's both parties in the White House or both parties in Congress, pretty much letting Indonesia do what they want. And then when somebody in Congress says, wait a minute, we're going to cut off your aid, military aid, that's what gets their attention. And so here, the Republicans are saying, sure, you can have it, no strings attached, no question, it's just an amazing abdication of responsibility.
They need us. They can't do everything
they can't
they
do it without
us.
And so we're directly responsible for what they're brutally doing. And they're still doing stuff, not just East Timor, but these other places.
This is, this is our tax dollars, or, in me and Hashi's case, our parents' tax dollars. And even even if you didn't know this was going on, even if you don't believe in this, it's still you're privileged to live in the U.S., to have the things that we have here, and your hands are kind of bloody from this, even if you didn't agree with it. And we think that people, not everyone's going to work on Timor. There's lots of stuff to do, but we think people in this country have to really start taking responsibility for what their government has done if they don't agree with it.
And calling the BS that's being put out there when U.S. people say that we're standing for freedom and democracy and human rights.
If you're going to say that, then follow through on it and look at what your country's doing, and seriously, people, take responsibility.
Following up on what you're saying, Glenn, as soon as the U.S. finally cut off our military aid, as soon as we did that, Indonesia almost immediately agreed to leave East Timor. So what we do has a profound effect, and that only happened because of the grassroots efforts of people like the folks that are watching.
And I want to put in a plug for the East Timor Action Network, which has now changed its name to the East Timor and Indonesia Action Network.
Exactly, to help the democracy struggle in Indonesia as well.
I want to give their website, and I also want to give the phone number in Seattle. The website for the East Timor and Indonesia Action Network is www.etan.org. And then there's the phone number in Seattle, which you have memorized.
Yes, it's 206, area code 206, 523, 3656.
Okay, that's a different one than what I had written down.
Oh, you had written down mine.
I had 328, 3278.
The one you wrote is mine. The one we'd like folks to call is the number of my wife, Deborah Morrison, area code 206-523-3656. And if people call that number, Glenn, they can find out different ways they can help the people of East Timor.
That's right. There are a lot of things happening, and and that's a good number to use.
Yeah.
Highly encouraged. This is a very rewarding project. It's been so rewarding for me.
Yeah, when it was so fun to talk with you folks on the phone and have you be able to say what this has meant to you. And you had already mentioned earlier in the show that this is a great David and Goliath story, and you
Yes.
folks had talked about how meaningful that is for you folks. So
And it was just amazing being over there in this country. And I mean, it's a wonderful, gorgeous place, and the people there have been through so much, and they were so kind, and just I don't really know how to really describe it over there. And I just really hope that more people will get involved. And East Timor is a baby country. It just turned 3. It just turned 3 on what was it? May 20th?
May 5th.
May 5th? Okay.
okay.
And so 3 years old, it needs some help. You know, a lot of people there want to become a more industrialized country. I think that this is an opportunity for more sustainable development. I don't want them to become another U.S., another China, you know.
It's yet to be seen what kind of country they're going to be. There's a lot of people in there doing good stuff, and there's also, you know, the IMF and all
The
those
World Bank and
all those
so
guys
on.
coming in,
Yeah.
and
There's
you don't know what's going to happen. That's why it's kind of exciting.
We have a few minutes left. I want to put in a 1-minute plug about the Australian oil problem that I think you had mentioned on the phone.
I think Joe could probably explain that a little better.
I'll just briefly say, Glenn, that it's illegal under international law to pirate or take the resources of another country when they're under occupation, and unfortunately that's what Australia did when Indonesia had illegally occupied East Timor. They came in and made deals with the Indonesian generals to take over the oil which lies in the water between the two countries. Happily, after a bunch of negotiations, East Timor has made an agreement where they're going to get some of that oil money, not as much as they deserve.
But the oil, my understanding is that the oil field is much closer to East Timor than it is to Australia.
It is.
Under maritime law,
It is.
most likely it would be considered East Timorese.
It is, but because of the illegal taking by agreement between the Australians and the Indonesians, the recent agreement didn't give the East Timorese what a lot of people feel they deserve, but it did give them some money, so they're going to have a lot more money coming in than they have before because of the modified agreement.
It would probably help them more in the long term, though, if they just had the field.
Exactly. I do want to talk, if I may, also about the different things that people can do to help.
Right, and that's the next point that
Great.
we're at. So go ahead.
Yeah, there's many different ways people can help. One is that we have been able to sponsor students over there, Glenn, that otherwise would not be able to go to school. And these students, as Ashley and Hashi can say, they really want to study. They're very studious folks. And so people can just chip in a little money to help them to be able to go to school. We also are selling fair trade, delicious East Timorese coffee that helps the coffee workers, and the profits from that also go to help the clinic.
And it's organic, fair
It's
trade.
organic. Thank you for
good.
adding
The
that.
best.
It's very rich.
Shade grown.
Yep.
It smells so good.
And we're also working on importing the beautiful textiles that you saw, and also salt, sea salt, that helps the women of Manatutu. So these are ways
Gourmet sea salt.
that people that people can get involved in it. Really, we've seen how it makes such a difference for them to be able to have desks, to have teachers, to be able to go to school.
And that's being organized through your Seattle group, so the phone number that you gave would be the one
To contact.
use
Yes,
that.
we can tell people how to help or get some
And
coffee.
we're down to just the last couple of minutes. I would just also urge, as you folks have, the people seek out alternative sources of information
Yes,
and not
indeed.
just rely on the
Oh, yeah.
mainstream and not rely on the propaganda from the government.
Democracy Now! has very much reported about East Timor. Amy Goodman was one of the reporters that was injured in East
She had
Timor,
her head
who
knocked
does
off.
is
Democracy
that
Now!
right?
So
Yep.
Oh, okay.
she's
She
a
almost died.
great source on East
I
Timor.
didn't realize that's where that was. Okay.
She really put her life on the line.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see if we can squeeze in something else here. You've just graduated. You've got another year to go,
Yeah.
and you're on the faculty, so you'll be there forever. You croak. Yeah.
That's right, forever.
So this project will continue. Your sister school relationship will continue, even though the founder is moving on.
Yep. Well, I'm sure that she's still going to stay involved in East Timor. And I'm definitely going back, whether with the school or not, I'm definitely going back and continuing on with this.
We'll have really big shoes to fill now that Ashley is leaving us, but
Oh, yeah, look at the size of those shoes. Man, laced all the way up to here.
Yep.
we're going to keep
Man,
the
those are
project
shoes to
going
fill.
and get more students involved. And
Yeah.
we really invite, again, other high schools, other churches, and civic groups to link up with a similar organization as Timor. We believe we have a moral responsibility to do it, and nothing could be more rewarding and
That's great.
positive.
I wonder if we can just get a quick closing message of a sentence or two from each person, and we'll wrap this thing out.
Well, I'd just really like to encourage people to, not just complain about the bad things, but, really try to fix something. Not only internationally, but right here in the country, right here in our cities and our towns. There's a lot of problems. And, a lot of people always ask me, like, well, why'd you do this? How'd you do this? And I'm just kind of like, I just did it. And, I mean, you can just do things
Yeah.
to help people.
What a concept.
And, the government isn't doing it. Who's going to do it?
Yeah. Great, thanks. Hashi.
Yeah, well, I'm so very glad that in the beginning of the school year, I looked at the catalog for school classes and figured, East Timor, this sounds interesting. Because seriously, this trip was just one of the most amazing things that I've done. And I think that it's such a great experience, especially for people who have more privilege, but for everybody, just because it's so great to experience going to a third world country. And just seeing how the people live there, I want to go back and be in a village for a while, and I want to get to know the people even better.
Great.
And yeah, Timor is just such a wonderful country. Viva Timor-Leste!
Thank you, Joe.
I would just say that the freedom and independence of East Timor, even though they have a long way to go, represents, I think, the victory of international solidarity over corruption, cynicism, and corporate control politics. And Ashley and other people around the world have shown us the way here. I'm honored to be a part of it, and I really encourage people to be involved, to do something to repair this part of the world that unfortunately our government has torn us under. We can do it, and urge people to get involved. Give us a call. We can tell them how to make a difference.
Great, thank you. I want to thank Ashley Barnard and Hashi Hashimoto and Joe Szwaja.
Thank you, Glenn.
I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. For information about what we've been discussing, you can contact Joe or his wife Deborah at the phone number that we've announced. The website for the East Timor and Indonesia Action Network is www.etan.org. They're a great source of information and activity and honest, reliable, accurate information.
Exactly.
They're a very ethical, altruistic group. I really appreciate them. For information about a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change, you can contact the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at 360-491-9093, or check out our website, www.olyfor.org. We're all one human family, and we all share this one planet. We can create a better world, but we all have to work at it. And the world needs just exactly what you have to offer. Thanks for watching.